The views and opinions expressed during Love and Life with Lana and Dave are those only of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or the position of our podcast hosts or affiliates. Any content provided is not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, anyone, or anything. All right, let's do it.
You're listening to Love and Life with Lana and Dave, the podcast where logic is power and you take control. Thank you for tuning in and making the choice to listen in and get ideas for your own love and life. Now, here are your hosts, Lana Williams and David Vaccaro.
This is Lana coming to you in a very high temperatured environment. July has been quite over the top when it comes to temperatures. So this week I figured I'd do something a little bit fun and frivolous. I'm going to talk about my career as a DJ up until this point. Now, does anybody care about this information? Probably not. Is there a call for some information about my career or my life as a DJ? I'm pretty sure there is not. But you never know. There are people who ask me about it, and so you never know. Someday, after I'm gone, this might be interesting to someone. If nothing else, it's documentation, right? So when I was a kid, I was really into music. I come from somewhat of a musical background. Then I had, mom was into Motown, and, even my grandmother and grandfather, they were into their own music. Mostly it was going to be stuff like Bing Crosby, maybe Frank Sinatra, even maybe previous to that, some Duke Ellington, some Stan Getz, things like that, might have been what my grandparents were into. I grew up watching Lawrence Welk. Now, I don't know if anybody knows what that is. But at one time there was almost a Glenn Miller type of program that was on TV, and I can't remember what night it was. It might have been Sunday night, where it was the whole thing with the conductor and the orchestra and people dancing like they would, in the 50s, right? Or the 40s, basically. And so that's kind of what I grew up with. There were a lot of jokes about that and stuff. And so, for the most part, I kind of love all music. So as much as I'd like to make fun of music from the 20s and 30s and 40s, I mean, we all listen to music that came from an origin from that time. And so it might be tired and, really lame to some people to listen to music like that. But that stuff, even easy listening music, which eventually became like kind of muzak, stuff that you would hear in elevators and things like that. That stuff, it had a place, right? So I believe like historically that a lot of stuff like that is valid, even though a lot of people did make fun of it. And as a kid, I did as well, because I think that's just part of being a kid, right? You make fun of everything that you're not listening to and everything, even from the 40s, 50s, 60s. When I was a kid, I would make fun of stuff like that just because I think it's part of the ritual of being a kid, right? So I got my start probably around 1985, give or take. What I would do when I was a kid was listen to the radio religiously. I had boxes and boxes and boxes of tapes. Well, let's start from before the tapes, when I was really young. And I had like one of these portable record players. Now that's something that used to have like, that looked like a suitcase, and it would have like a phonograph in it, right? So you would put it down, you would open it up, the cord would come out, you'd plug it into the wall, and it would have like a stereo in it with probably, I guess, but maybe stereo speakers, but I think probably just like an AM speaker or something that was pretty mono at that time. Somebody gave it to me. I don't remember who it was, and I wish I could ask, because I think most people back then that would have known that answer are probably now gone. But it would have been interesting to remember where that was, that somebody handed me that, or gave my mom that to give to me, and I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, right? It was great because I could play records on it. I'd buy 45s and that sort of thing. I think if I could, like, I would try to get an allowance, and then I'd buy like a 45 record a week or something like that. And then my mom had a record collection as well, so I used to be able to dip into her record collection and listen to stuff like that, plus whatever Disney records I had, at the time as a kid, where the movies that I listened to as a kid, we had soundtracks. Needless to say, I was immersed in all kinds of music different kinds of music. Now, when I was a kid, it was AM radio. And at a very small age, or a young age, excuse me, I had one of those Panasonic radios where you had this, it almost had like a keychain attached to it. It was like this little round. Panasonic did some really kind of funky stuff when I was a kid. And I had both a tape player or a radio and it was a transistor is what it was. I got into a lot of different kinds of music really young. And my mother was a lot of things, but the one thing she was that was beneficial to me was a major music fan. And she was interested in a lot of Motown. So I heard all of that stuff growing up, Marvin Gaye and, George Benson. And, there were a lot of stuff from the 70s that I loved to listen to. But then there was also that history of the anthologies of things like Stevie Wonder and, I'm trying to think who else she had. I know probably the Supremes were, kind of a major thing. A lot of Martha and the Vandellas, things like that. But she had a very, very robust collection of Motown-like music, which was really cool. And then when I was growing up, stuff like the 3 Degrees and Barry White and who else can I name from back then that was really popular? Rose Royce and Bobby Caldwell and Al Green. All of these type of people were people that I listened to growing up. Like when I was a kid, when those songs were charting. Oh, I'm trying to think of everybody else, but I could sit here and this is my thing. I have this little Rolodex in my head and I can sit here and name artists and songs for like hours, which nobody really wants me to do. But a fun thing I could tell you that when I was in my 20s, I used to get phone calls at 4:00 in the morning because I have this weird Rolodex in my head of who sang what song, what year it was, sometimes what label it was, sometimes, stupid stuff like what people were wearing when they recorded the song or who recorded, a copy or a remake of a specific song, things like that, or what sample was in a song from some other song, right? But when I was in my 20s, I think there were samples going on in the 90s too, right? Because that's pretty much when I was in my 20s. I'd get phone calls at 4:00 in the morning from people out at bars that were like making bets with other people about who sang some song. And everybody would call me because they knew that I would have the answer to that. So they would do the thing where they would both argue for a while, then they would wager their bet. Some people that were coming out of a bar, maybe not 4:00 in the morning, but definitely late enough that I would like be woken up from a dead sleep. And they would argue and they'd place a bet for so much money, $10, $20, whatever it was. And then they would be like, okay, are we ready to call? Because all right, are you sure this is who you think saying this? And they would call me and I'd give them the answer. And sometimes I would hear, see, I told you, and I'd click, like they wouldn't really even talk to me. They would just take the information, turn around and grab the money from the person that they bet over this song and hang up the phone with me because I was of no use anymore. But that was what would happen. So sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, get the call like that, then go back to sleep and then wake up in the morning and say, did that happen? And I feel like somebody called me at 3 a.m. and asked me a dumb question, about a song by Robert Palmer or whatever. So that was kind of my life, right? When I was a kid growing up, I had cassette tapes. I can't even tell you how many cassette tapes I have. I have friends that, we would buy cassette tapes by, two things. One, my mom worked for an insurance company for a little while. And somehow or other, I'm not sure what the process was or whatever. She had access to a lot of dictaphone tapes. Those were basically people that were doing dictation. They had closets full of tapes for insurance purposes or whatever the case may be. So they always had these blank tapes and they'd have this inventory of blank tapes sitting around boxes and boxes and boxes of 60-minute, 90-minute, those kind of 120-minute tapes. And I can't remember who did dictaphone. It might have been Sony, but I'm not sure. Panasonic even maybe. And then once that supply ran out, my mom wasn't working there anymore. I used to go and buy these Sony tapes. I'd try to find out where could I get them wholesale. A lot of times I'd go to flea markets and they would have, for whatever reason, this ridiculous amount of boxes of cassette tapes. So I'd buy 10, 20 cassette tapes at a shot, right? Sit home and record anything that was on the radio. So this is how it started. I started to record songs on the radio. I didn't understand it as a kid, but I get it now. I happen to like lists and organization and whatever. I have friends that thought I was really crazy when I was doing this as a kid, but I had a notebook and I had cassette tapes and I would I would sit in front of the radio and wait. And everybody at Gen X knows this. I'm not the only one that did this. So this isn't as crazy as it sounds because we all did this, right? This is the way we would get music as a kid. Radio was our medium. That's where we heard everything. The trick was to find radio that was advanced enough. You had the radio you lived, that was going on in your neighborhood, and you had the radio that you listened to commonly, right? The pop stuff, the top 40 stuff, that stuff was crossover. But what you were looking for was college radio and places to find radio that was advanced in the sense that you would get songs before your neighborhood got them. That was, at that time, that was the goal. A couple of my friends and I, one specific friend and I, we used to take at one time we ended up with these Walkmans, and these Walkmans had recordability, which was like, oh my God. It's so crazy to think that nobody cares about this now, but at one time, Sony put out a Walkman that actually recorded music. And so you could record music from your Walkman off of the radio station, and it was like you could walk around. Now, when you think about it, stereo wasn't, you could plug your speakers into something in a home stereo system or whatever, but for those of us walking around with headphones, and we had these, big boom boxes, what you would call them, for so long, where you could listen to what you wanted to, you could play what you wanted to, you could go around, you could catch stations, but it was a cumbersome thing. You had to go and buy a ridiculous amount of D batteries. D batteries were expensive back then, but you would sell your sneakers, or you would sell, you would cut off a right arm or whatever and sell it to somebody to get D batteries, because that was like the big thing back then. And then make sure that your radio was like, your batteries couldn't die. That was like awful, right? So then you try to get it down to like something that sounded good, that was easy enough to carry, and you didn't have to spend as much on it. Maybe if you got something where you could buy C batteries, it was a little bit of a relief because it wasn't as expensive. It wasn't as heavy. It wasn't as huge and cumbersome, right? But if you look at these old 80s movies, and it sounds crazy, but in the 80s, this is what we would carry around. And so, one of my favorite movies is Say Anything. And at the end of Say Anything, there's John Cusack with the boombox over his head. Well, it's significant for two reasons. One, obviously, the theme of the movie, but two, the boombox was a big thing. That was what we had at the time, right? So that's how we got unplugged and got out on the road with our music. So when we got Walkmans that could record, like, that was unbelievable to us, right? And Walkmans might have taken a couple of AA batteries. Think AAA batteries were not happening at that time, or at least not for those things. So that was what we used. We would, AAA batteries or AA batteries, were way easier. We would go to New York to these, like, on these Greyhound bus trips, as kids. And New York was kind of like where, luckily we were close enough to New York that we could get on a bus and go for a day. And New York was like the future, right? You went down to New York and they had all this stuff that your neighborhood didn't have. They had clothes that weren't popular in your neighborhood yet. They had music that wasn't popular in your neighborhood yet. Like, so what we would go down and do, and I'm going to bring up WBLS because that was the place we listened to. We went down there. We couldn't wait to get somewhere where we could catch WBLS. My Walkman actually had an antenna. It had a long range antenna. So I was out there poking people's eyes out with this antenna trying to catch WBLS. And I don't even know how many, as many tapes as I could carry, while I was walking around New York, So, and we would record almost everything. We would just record WBLS like for 4 hours. We didn't care what it was, with the exception of the commercials. We just listened. We just did everything because we didn't know what anything was. Then we would get home and we would dissect all the music that we grabbed. And most of it was stuff we hadn't heard yet. It was stuff that was 2, 3. Now, like, living in Rhode Island, I don't know how it is now because I'm not as much of a follower as music like on the street as I used to be. It comes to you in a different way now, so it's just a whole different thing. But when I was a kid, like I lived in a very pop intensive area, so it was usually top 40, but it was mostly mainstream. Even if it was rock and roll, even if it was funk and electric funk and regular funk, that kind of stuff, or R&B, soul, that kind of stuff wasn't groundbreaking. It was usually pretty worn in. So if it's to this day, every club I play in Rhode Island is not really a breaking place. There are a couple of people that I know that really play cutting edge stuff and actually create music, to be honest with you, that they don't just break it, they make it. But most places in Rhode Island are the music has been around 3, 4, 6 months to a year. A lot of stuff, well, at least in my case now, I'm playing old school, so that I don't even really count anymore. But there was a point in time where, if it wasn't out for like a good 6 months, like you wouldn't be able to get any response for it, So once we grabbed all the new music, that was great. But as a DJ trying to play new music, not so much, right? You would really have to get a specific crowd to get a reaction out of anything that hadn't been played on the radio for a long time. Basically, we would do all that. We would dissect all the music we got in New York. Sometimes we would, even Boston, honestly, other than the college stations, there were Boston stations, New Bedford stations. We had a station, WBRU. Now, WBRU was a college station for Brown University, and I don't know if they were the only one, but I believe they were close to the only station that was Arbitron run. They were what you call a moving format, which means that they were actually playing stuff during the day. They mostly played alternative music. They were a college, but every Sunday they would play what you would call 360 degrees experience and sound or whatever, and it was all soul, black music, something you might hear in New York or something you might hear on a more progressive station, but you weren't hearing it, in the mainstream yet. And it was college, so on Sunday, most of the DJs that I ended up becoming friends with for years, those are the guys that would come in on a Sunday and just drop all kinds of tracks that like you would be looking for in New York. They would find stuff like that. They'd drop it on Sunday. Obviously there's stuff that we really liked that we had heard already, but really wasn't being played. There was also this like bunch of music that wasn't being played in the mainstream that we wanted to hear. This would be George Clinton and stuff like Twilight 22 and Orbit and a lot of Roger and Zapp and Slave and Sky and things like that. Those are the things that we wanted to hear as kids. That was, to us, exciting music, right? But it was never crossover, so we wouldn't hear it on the top 40 charts. But what we would do between Sunday on WBRU and Sunday, that was the one day of the week where if you were a person of color or you were a person who wanted to listen to anything except this like tops 40 mainstream, Dick Clark stuff, Sunday would be your day. And in our neighborhoods, you could hear it everywhere. So just like you would hear at the beach, and I just wanted to mention that too. And there was a point in time where there were maybe 3 or 4 stations in an area, and on a Saturday, even in the summer, when the kids were off of school and they go down to the beach, they had all their radios. They usually would tune into the same station. So when you walked around the beach, you heard the same thing coming from cars, coming from radios, coming from everywhere. You didn't even have to bring a radio a lot of the times, unless you wanted to hear something different. But if you wanted to hear what was on the charts, we had Casey Kasem that went on I believe every Sunday, but I'm not 100% sure. It might have been Saturday morning. I'm forgetting now, but that was broadcast everywhere. People all tuned into it, and it just came out of every radio. So it was out on the street. It was just something you heard as noise, which is really funny. So 360 was like that on Sunday. There was an early gospel thing that went on. I can't remember when it stopped. I'm not sure if it was 10 in the morning or noontime. But from that point on, it was all 360 music. And that was the stuff that we listened to or we couldn't wait to get a hold of. And of course, it was so much easier to record for that. So I had a lot of that stuff as well. Anyway, at one point, I would categorize. I had everything listed and I had everything alphabetized and categorized, and I just had it all in like an inventory. And I remember a few people being very taken back that I was so tedious about something like that, but I loved it. If I wanted to hear a song, I knew where it was. I knew what tape it was on. I labeled all my tapes 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it was, and put it literally, it looked like a little library. I had a little Dewey Decimal System going in my house. I had all of these racks and all that kind of stuff. So track 1 was here, track 2 was here. I had them all on, like timed out. It's not surprising that I became a DJ, but like I wanted to be able to grab a specific song that I wanted to hear at a specific time, and I wanted to, and I'm still like this, but I'm getting better. I'm not as bad as I used to be as a kid. I wanted to own every piece of music there was. I just wanted to own everything I was interested in anyway. Anything that anybody else would want. I didn't want to have to rely on the radio stations to play something for me to hear it. I wanted to own it. So I wanted it on vinyl. I wanted it on cassette. I wanted it on 45. See, these are the things that when I grew up, those are the mediums that I used. I came along right after the 8-track. So the 8-track didn't really happen during my time, but I knew some people who had 8-tracks. They were kind of cool. I don't remember if my mom owned one. I don't think she did. 8-tracks were always very confusing to me, and I never really understood how. I get how they worked, but it didn't seem to be a very convenient way to listen to anything. But of course, we could only use what we had, right? We only could play what we were given at that time, right? Those are the things that we could put music on. So 8-tracks seemed to be tough in the sense that you couldn't ever rewind an 8-track. You could only advance forward. And sometimes a track would be too long for, I can't remember there's a specific time frame that an 8-track has for each track. And if a song's too long, like it was a 10-minute track, it would actually fade out and come back. That was really frustrating. So you couldn't hear the track all the way through, like uncut. It would be broken up into 2 sections. Or if you had a really like a double album with a lot of tracks on it, I want to say like Prince's 1999 or Kiss Double Platinum or Donna Summer's Live and More or Donna Summer's on the Radio. I think on the Radio was a double album. In that case, the 8-track, it would never fall the right way. So you would never just be like done with the track here and then put another 8-track in and it would start somehow or other. It would just be in the middle. Like they just want to make sure that they got everything in there. And the end of the track never like ended at the end of the 8-track like it should. You know, I just remember being really frustrated with that. Cassettes were better. You couldn't advance the same way, but you could rewind. And a track was a track. You didn't have to worry about it being broken up with a cassette. But, you know, cassettes were smaller and they were a little tougher to deal with. And if you left them in your car, they would melt. And if somebody snagged the top of the cassette, you know, or the tape player was not being nice, or you had a tape player that wasn't working right and you needed a new one, it would pull the tape straight out of the tape and it, you know, would just end up garbled and up inside the thing. You'd have to go get it and hope it didn't break and get a pencil and reel it back in and all that kind of stuff. So that's the stuff that I grew up with, right? Records were great. And eventually I would take over my mother's collection. I would add my own collection because by the time I was 18, 19, I had all of my own records on top of what she had. And I was really good at taking care of records. I took very, very good care of stuff like that. So my mother never had a problem with me taking her stuff because it was always in good condition. Then at some point, you know, we were in the CDs and things like that. But I ended up with quite a bit of a record collection. So I think in 1980, I'm pretty sure it was 1985 that I started playing. Like, all right, I have all these records and all these tapes. What am I going to do now? Like, I have it all. I guess I should play it for people that don't have it. That was my idea of that. Well, I might as well put it to some good use. So I did. I started playing as a DJ. I started going out and finding places that when I was a kid in 1985, I was 17. Technically, I should not have been allowed anywhere near a bar or a club. But when I was a kid, that's not the way it was. You could be 18. And for a very long time in my area, the age to drink was 18. It was a very old habit. And so once they changed it to 21, it didn't update or it didn't correct itself as quickly as it should have. And it was right before I turned 18 that happened. And so technically it was 21. And then I lived in an area where, you know, the clubs and bars would maybe not be owned, or they maybe not people would look the other way about things like that for a number of reasons. And so I actually started working in bars at probably 16, 17 years old. That's where all the equipment was. I would much rather have done that than be in it drinking. I never was, not that I don't like going out and having a good time, but I've always really fallen back on working. That's really where I'd rather be. If I got to be anywhere in a bar, I'd rather be behind the DJ booth. I know I'm going to hear music I like. I know that it's most likely not going to suck. Depends on who's playing the music. Sometimes if I do go out and listen to a DJ that's, you know, fairly new, you know, God love them, but I sometimes I can't. It drives me crazy to listen to a DJ that's not right on the beat, or that's mixing things haphazardly, or, you know, has his pitch in a specific place and whatever. The speakers aren't right, or the EQ isn't right, or it's too low, or whatever it is. There's so many perfectionist things that I do that, or I have going on in my head. Now that's my own personal problem, and I get it. So anyway, I started very, very young, and when I started going out, I had to, and it sounds crazy now. I don't know if it sounds crazy now. Does it? I mean, it's 2024. So if you're a DJ as a woman and you actually know what you're doing, yes, there's a lot of good DJs out there that are girl DJs or woman DJs or however you want to call it. When I was young, there were none, or there were very few. I think there were maybe in my area, there might have been 4 of us. When I started DJing, I don't believe it was even 4. There might have been one or two in New York. There might have been one or two in Boston. And I think there might have been one other girl in my area that I had never met. Somebody came in one night and told me that there was a girl that looked like me that was a DJ somewhere else. And I never met this. I don't think I did, but I kept getting confused for somebody else. Every time I went out and worked, somebody would come over and ask me if I was somebody else. And I was like, nope. Wow, you look just like this other person. So I went through that for a little while. It's a boys club. It was always a boys club. It kind of still is. I mean, for the most part, when I go out and do my thing, it shouldn't be shocking anymore. But for a very long time, for whatever reason, it was very weird for people to see me DJ as a girl and actually know what I was doing. So I actually, in order to get jobs, I had to go to places and just walk in. I had to be prepared with actual records in my car, because what they would do is they'd like to throw me like a curveball when I walked in. I don't know if they thought I didn't know what I was doing or whatever it was. So I couldn't come back in audition. Like they would, if I left, they would just, I will call you, and I would never. So I had to call their bluff a lot to get the jobs I wanted. And I had to be prepared with music on me. I had to have it in my trunk and ready to go. And so if I walked in there on a Monday or Tuesday or whatever, and they said, yeah, well, let's see what you got. I'd be like, I'll be right back. And I go grab a half a crate out of my car and I'd start playing stuff. I had to do it that way because otherwise they would think I was full of it and I wouldn't get anywhere. So yeah, always being ready to audition, always being on my toes. I think my inspiration, or a few people that, I won't get into a name right now because this is just an overview, but there are a few people that I listened to when I was a kid in college radio and ended up becoming friends with, even if I didn't stay friends with them for that long and lost touch with them. I think that's really where I got the inspiration to start doing this. And it never occurred to me, to be honest with you, to worry about whether I was a woman or not in the business. It just didn't occur to me hey, why don't I play this music? I seem to be doing good at it. I play music. People seem to like what I'm playing. And it wasn't until I got to the clubs. The parties weren't so bad, obviously, because people that knew me would hire me when I was younger. But when I got to the clubs, that would be where I would hit the obstacles of people thinking that I didn't really know my job, or I didn't seem to get the freedom sometimes as much as my male peers did. I had to come up with creative ways to get around that, right? So, and let them know that I did know what I was doing. I did have some sort of skill and talent, and I could read the room and I could play things that people wanted to hear. The unique perspective that I feel like I brought to some places was being a girl, being a female, and wanting to go out to a club and party and knowing what other women liked. Not saying that male DJs don't know that stuff, but generally they don't necessarily have as much of an intuitive read on stuff like that as somebody who's just one of that crowd. Obviously I had my little tips and tricks and subliminal drops and things like that I did, but mostly if I was out and I was this bunch of girls, what would I want to hear? What would I want to hear next? And sometimes I played what I wanted to hear. Now, I never favored myself over what everybody else liked. I have always tried to play what the crowd wanted to hear. There have been places where I've broken songs, meaning I've played stuff and gotten a crowd to understand what it was. There's places where I kind of stayed on the safe side and played what people generally like to hear. It depends on the place. Sometimes you got to go in and be generic and then wait for requests to come in and wait for a formula to emerge for the place that you're in. And then, of course, there's the period of time where I was in my, I'd say late 20s, early 30s, where I was in places where I was working 4 and 5 nights a week and would get very, very set in my ways and very, very automatic about stuff. And a DJ who shall remain nameless, when I first started in the business, I remember him, I noticed that he had a pile of records and he was going through them and making little piles. And maybe they were 45s. I can't remember because of the place that, I think it was because of the place that we were in. They were typically 45 records that they would play. And I said to him, what are you doing? And he said, programming my music. Now, that's actually a good idea. It depends on what it is that you're doing. If you go into a wedding and you know what you're playing, for the most part, this is the type of crowd you're having. I mean, most of the times you get some requests from people at a wedding or a high school Sweet 16 or something where you kind of know what the format's going to be because, one, you're being told that several times while you're booking the gig, but then also you just kind of know you have the specific demographic that you're going to be playing to. So if all your kids are going to be between 16 and 18 or between 14 and 16, for the most part, you are kind of going to know what your general bell curve of music is going to be. But sometimes you go into a place and I worked at Bowling Alley. I've worked all kinds of weird places like that. So you go in and you're I have no idea, different parts of town. There's people that like different types of music. So they may like the specific song that makes no sense, but in that one bar, it's this big deal. Or if you work in Newport and it's a very touristy atmosphere, and you're playing stuff that's what they would call now yacht rock. There was a point in time where that didn't have a name, but it was like Jack Johnson and Dave Matthews and Jimmy Buffett and, Alan Jackson and some of that kind of stuff, where Garth Brooks, where it was sort of like we're near a beach, we're in a sunny atmosphere, and we're having drinks with umbrellas in them. And this is the type of stuff we like to hear while we're sitting back outside this outside bar. This is the kind of stuff we want to hear out here. It's islandy, it's, that kind of thing. So there was a specific type of music that would kind of emerge. If you played at a specific place long enough, you would start to get to know the regulars, and you would start to get to know kind of the feel of what people wanted to hear. Now I work in a place now that's like that. Like I work in a place that's mostly old school, and there are old school songs that for some reason everybody thinks are just, they go bananas over them. And I try to, it doesn't matter why. Obviously, everything that they like is good for them, and so I don't judge it. But sometimes I'm very curious as to like what makes a song such a big deal in a specific place. I don't know what it is, but some songs are a big deal everywhere. So if you play them, for the most part, they're going to get a good response. But then other songs you play like by accident, and there's this big, crazy response to it, and you're just kind of like, what is happening? So once you get into a place and you kind of get to know it, you kind of feel like, okay, well, for some reason they don't like this song. Okay, well, and as time goes on, you kind of come down to a cold list of things that work for that place. And again, you don't want to become too like this person I was talking about that was programming their music. You don't want to become too like rigid and set in your ways. And you do want to throw a curveball at them sometimes, or come out of left field with a song that they haven't heard in a while that they like, but they just like don't remember that they like. It depends on what exactly the gig is or the event is or where you are, right? So there's certain songs that obviously would go over well if you're at a wedding. I guess it depends on the wedding. I mean, you could play Disturbed or Metallica or something like that at a wedding if it was the right one, because I've actually played like a Harley Davidson wedding before, and I've had several different types of weddings, which is cool because I like to see stuff that's out of the ordinary. I mean, I'm a non-traditionalist all the way, right? So I like to see stuff that's out of the ordinary and that people aren't usually doing. There was a point in time, like in my late 20s, early 30s, where that's what I was doing. I was like, probably because I was partying and drinking, it's so easy to like fall into a pattern where you just play this and this and this and this, and it's going to work because you've played it 34,000 times already, and it works every time you do it. But it also gets to be like you could set your watch by it. And so I remember one night a person came in and asked me, was I going to play a specific song yet, because it was midnight and they hadn't heard it, which means they were so used to my set being like clockwork. And this particular night, for whatever reason, I might either have played it before they got there or played it like off by 10 minutes or whatever it was. It was enough for them to come and say to me, hey, I usually hear this at midnight and it's like 12:05 or 12:10 or 12:15 and I haven't heard it yet. And I remember thinking, oh, that's not good. It helps to be a female in the sense that you kind of can read that crowd, because girls going out is a different thing. It's obviously not everybody going out is a different thing. And so I've worked in gay clubs, I've worked in strip joints, I've done weddings, I've done Harley Davidson weddings, I've done divorce parties and, class reunions and sweet 16s and all kinds of stuff, right? Military send-offs and funeral parties. And I don't mean funeral parties like everybody's happy, but like a get-together that's built around a celebration of life, or what we would call a repast, right? So it depends on where you are. There's a thing called a repast. People are celebrating that somebody lived, so it's not a sad event, but it's an event where you come together and mark the life of a person that is important to you. So all kinds of reasons to get together and throw parties, right? 70s parties, 60s parties. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to do a 50s party, which I think I've just not done since I was starting out, like in the late 80s, early 90s. I have not done like an entire 50s theme. So that's going to be really cool, actually. Like anytime I get thrown something like that, I'm like excited about it because I don't ever do that. It's just, I don't know. It's just like not as common. It used to be pretty common when I was younger in the 90s, but it isn't so much anymore. So when somebody says, hey, I want you to do this, I just did a 70s party a couple weeks ago. I was like, I really like the 70s and I know it well, and so it's like second nature to me to come into a party and do like the 70s. I mean, I've been doing it every other week or every week for, I don't know how, 3 years at this point. In this one place I go to, it's mostly 70s, some 80s, but it's also good for people to know that you can switch gears. You can switch gears. I've done Portuguese parties. I've done quinceañeras. I've done all reggae parties, all reggaeton, all reggae, all Latin, all country parties. It just takes a little bit of prep and understanding what people want to hear. And for the most part, ask them what they want to hear because they'll tell you, and it's better to know what they want than to like try to guess and have them be frustrated. It's more important that they're happy with what they're hearing. But it's going on like close to 40 years. So, the reason I bring this up and I'm doing this podcast is like, okay, I'm trying to figure out what do I do at this point. Obviously, I will always DJ for certain events and certain things that people want me to do. It's always something that I can kind of pull my equipment out and go do. I don't mind doing it. There was a point in time where, I was working 5 days a week and working 5 nights a week. And in the between, I was doing private parties where I could. So I might work Friday and Saturday night, but I also might have a Saturday gig and a Sunday gig. Sometimes I worked Sunday nights, then sometimes I worked Monday Night Football. There were times where I worked 6 days a week. There was a point in time in 2018 where I was working 7 nights, just 7 straight nights. It comes and it goes, and it's fun. And so you always try to keep the balance of I want to do this because it's a kind of a fun gig. It's fun, a fun side job, like it's better than, I don't know, retail or something where it's not as much. Well, there are some people who really love retail, and there are people who love like hairdressing, and people who love doing nails, and people who love doing other kind of stuff on the side, Uber and Lyft and that kind of thing. But for me, it's always been my social outlet. So it keeps me from being a recluse and never leaving my house ever because I work from home during the day. So just to bring it up, just some of the things that I've experienced over the years. It got better as I got older, and there are a decent amount of female DJs in my area. I got to be honest, I don't think there's enough, but it's probably tripled since I was young. And all I mean by that is I think there's a good 6 of us, maybe 8 of us at this point. But whenever I do see somebody who is out there and who's really doing a good job and who's kicking ass, and taking names, I will always try to support them, or I will try to follow them and give them, accolades and try to give them praise when I see it, because it's really not something personally that I got when I was younger. I was in the era of Gen X and early millennial. It was more like the sexual comments, not nasty comments, but more like, wow, hey, just giving me comments about whether or not I talked on the mic and I sounded sexy on the mic. That's, what I mean? I guess that's in the old days, in the 70s and 80s, 90s, that made sense. Hey, it's eventually you start going, well, I actually can do my job here, and I actually do know what I'm doing. And sure, I might look good doing it, but I also actually have talent and a skill, and I'm actually executing an occupation here. There were things that I had to deal with as far as people that I dated, and whether or not somebody would come into a place and sit around and make everybody uncomfortable that I dated, or like never come in at all and then question me because they weren't there. So it's never been easy to date people doing that as a side gig. I've had people say to me, well, do you really need to do this? Yeah, I do really need to do this. And I've had guys say, well, I know you have to do this thing tomorrow night, but I don't know how much are they paying you? I'll pay you twice that. Hang out with me instead. And it's kind of like, no, I have a gig here. Like, these are people that like are expecting me to show up, and they've paid me, or they're going to pay me when I get there. So like, no, I'm not going to cancel on them because that's not the way I do things. Like, but I've had people say that to me. Well, what are you doing that for? I was like, well, this is what I do. It's a bummer sometimes for being a DJ in the sense that you don't really have, especially when you're in the thick of it, you don't really have your weekends free. If you are dating somebody, or if you have a social life that you would want to have, sometimes you're somewhere working in a club and your nights off are more Monday, Tuesday, maybe Sunday. You don't really have your Friday nights and Saturday nights free like everyone else. And so, especially when I was younger, I'd work my 5 nights or 5 days a week and do my usually 9 to 5 thing or whatever. And then I was working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and maybe Sunday sometimes. And dating was tough because of that, because people wanted you to be around on the weekends. They didn't want to come in and sit around and watch you work because they felt weird about that. And I guess I get it. You're not really having a good time. You're just gonna feel like part of your relationship is like missing, right? Because on the weekends you're off, you're ready to go do your thing, and then like the person you're dating is like working for 2 nights and you don't see them. So it does kind of cause a divide sometimes, and it is tough. I've usually dated people in the industry because those people are also working. I mean, it's just easy, right? So they'd be bartending or bouncing or DJing, and so would I, and so it would make more sense. Or they would be working with bands or in a band or something like that. So the people that I've dated have typically been like on the same schedule, because if they're not, like if I meet a guy that's just like a bank teller, that would just, and I always make the bank teller joke, but that's the type of guy that's just like not going to deal with my schedule. You know what I mean? He's just going to be like, hey, I have this one job and now I'm off for the weekend and I want to go blow off steam, and why are you not available? So that's the kind of thing that can be a bummer. It can be a bummer when, obviously things like traveling, and if you're somebody like me that could travel, but just hates to lose the money. So really, that's not everybody. I guess that's just the way I am. I've had my regrets. I've done some stuff. I've missed out on some stuff that was pretty important from saying, well, I got to work. I mean, as a workaholic and somebody who likes to avoid a lot of things, work is a good excuse for some stuff, and it comes in handy. And so I've actually missed quite a few interesting things because I've had to work. And I've been on vacations where I wasn't working, and I will total in my head, which is crazy, how much money I would have made had I not gone somewhere. I've always done that. So I've always tried to say, well, all right, how can I go on vacation and spend or make the most amount of money? And so the vacations that I've taken, I've actually taken a week off of work during the day, only working on weekends. Let's say that I wasn't working Wednesday and Thursday. I did have a club I worked 4 nights a week, and then they cut me down to 2, which is Friday and Saturday. And a friend of mine who's a bartender and we went away, but what we did was we worked the Friday, or we worked the Saturday. That's what we did. We worked the Saturday night, and then we took off and drove where we went on vacation for the weekend, came back for the Friday. So technically we only lost one weekend, whereas most people would leave Friday night or Friday afternoon and go do what you want to do, and then come back the following Monday and take 2 weekends in the vacation. Not I don't know about her. She probably, I have no idea if I was forceful enough that I made it so that she didn't take the 2 weekends she wanted, but I didn't want to lose one weekend. I didn't want to lose more than one. I didn't even want to lose the one weekend that I lost, but I was all right, well, we'll have the cash. We'll go in on Saturday night. We'll work all night, and then we'll walk out with money. We'll have our money for the week, technically, to go do our traveling, our grabbing food, whatever it is. And then when we come back, we'll replenish it. And sure, we'll lose 2 nights, but it's better than losing 4. So I have always been that way. I don't know that it's going to change. I hope. I think I should at some point. So yeah, I'm standing at a crossroads and going on my 40 and trying to figure out what do I want to do, right? So officially, I was a DJ starting in 1986. However, I did do some stuff in 85, and so it kind of part of 85 was happening. So I'm looking at 38 years at this point and trying to say, okay, well, at what point do you stop and do something else, or do you stop and say, okay, I'm too old for this? I don't want to ever think I would be too old for it, but you do think about it, and you still, sometimes you're lugging equipment around and you're just going, I don't know how much longer I want to do this. It all pays for itself and stuff, but it does put wear and tear on you. It does make you tired. It does beat you up to carry equipment around. And as a certain amount of time goes by and you get older, the nights 2, 3, 4 in the morning, that starts to wear you out. When you're young, you don't sleep much, so you don't care. I mean, there was a point in time where I just didn't sleep. I've had 2 and 3 jobs my entire life, and at one point in my early 20s, I just didn't sleep. I think I might have slept 5 hours a night, 4 hours a night. I was working most of the time, and I just jammed myself into a schedule where I really couldn't get a long night's sleep or a decent long period of sleep without being interrupted somehow. Some of that was third shift, and that'll age you right there. Some working third shift for a couple of years will kill you. Basically, that's it. I just kind of wanted to talk about my life as a DJ. Oh, how exciting is that? Oh, let me tell you. Starting with knobs and going to faders. When I first started DJing, I was using equipment that had knobs on it. I was turning knobs. So there you go. Knob turning is great if you are a sound engineer, because that's what, actually, I think sound engineers are starting to go into faders too. And then a lot of them are starting to go digital, and they're starting to walk around with tablets. So the faders are starting to roll into the engineer work and stuff. For a very long time, probably in the early 80s, DJ mixers became a fader thing. But when I first started, they were knobs, and I was probably on some older equipment, but it was great. I started with crates. I don't know how many crates I carried. I actually have a friend of mine that had a truck because I had a coffin. I mean, in the coffin means I had a very big piece of equipment that had 2 turntables and a mixer in it. And my car, what I was driving, I couldn't take what I was gonna take to DJ. I couldn't use that because it didn't work, right? So I did that for a little while, and I got over that quick and started to put together 2 cases for my turntables separately, because that whole big piece of equipment, I couldn't lug it around. I couldn't put it in a vehicle to have it be convenient. So, and even when I could, it was tough to carry. I did pick it up by the middle and carry it around, but it was tough to carry. It was not bigger than I was, but it was big enough that it was not easy to get around corners and upstairs and stuff like that. Also, the one thing I wanted to say was that the work ethic, I don't know what it is. As we get older, it seems like there's a work ethic that's missing. And it seems like, I talked to all of my veteran DJ friends and stuff. Well, I don't know what it is. Maybe we're just being judgmental, but there was a point in time where when I was young, I wanted to be a DJ so bad that I would go out on gigs and carry someone's equipment and
maybe they would buy me drinks, or maybe they would buy me food, or they'd throw me 10, $20 or whatever to be there. But like, I was excited to be there, and like, I would like give up my weekends and nights to do that. Like, I wanted to be a DJ to the point where I just wanted to get into the industry. So I wanted to be around it, you know, and it was the same way with radio. So I don't know. It just seems like the DJ's life has changed a lot too. So maybe that's it. But it seems like we can't, you know, I know when I started trying to train DJs and I started taking DJs out as intern, there was always something that would come up that would make them like not reliable. And I would always be frustrated. Like, if you wanted to do this, then you want to do this. Like, I'm all about making sure that you get paid for it. I'm obviously not going to pay you for the whole gig, but if you want to come out at the beginning and put together some equipment, and hey, you want to maybe get used to the equipment and then maybe do a set before I go on, it's all going to be part of you learning what you need to do. And that was always like, either if it was a girl, which I mean, if there was a girl DJ or a female DJ that wants to learn, was much more excited about that, right? Because I just felt like there wasn't enough of us out there. And when Spinderella came along, I was very excited about that. Between Spinderella and Sheila E., we had a couple good idols in the 80s. But before that, there really wasn't anybody to like look at and say, okay, I want to be like that. Or here's somebody who made it and did something. And I can look at them and say, all right, well, maybe someday I'll do that. You know, it was like with girls, it was like, well, my boyfriend doesn't like me doing this. My boyfriend doesn't want me to do this. And, you know, I'd have to be like, okay, well, you have to decide what you want to do here. Because if you want to be a DJ in this business, you're going to have boyfriends that don't like what you're doing. So you're going to have to figure out whether or not this is something that you want to do. You're going to have to find somebody that's secure enough to be okay with this, and maybe even comes out with you on gigs. I have friends that are husband and wife teams, and they're great at it, and everything's wonderful, but you have to have somebody that's not insecure about it. Why anybody would be, I really don't know, but I honestly think it's ridiculous, but that's just me. I don't really get the jealousy, insecurity thing as far as what somebody does for a living. It's weird to me, but that would always frustrate me. I'd get into that where like, oh, the boyfriend would either want to go and have to be there and do the whole thing, in which case the person I was trying to train wasn't focusing on anything and we weren't getting anything done. It was very Yoko Ono. Or, you know, they would insist that the person that I was training just not do it, or find some way to get in the middle of it or sabotage it. And that was frustrating. If I was DJing, or if I was training a guy DJ, it was the same thing, but in the opposite, that there must be some other reason that this DJ is learning from me. I'm taking him to this club to do this gig. There must be some other thing. Again, I can't stress enough how frustrating jealousy and insecurity is. It's so annoying. It gets in the way of a lot of stuff. And if somebody wants to be a DJ, I'm professional. I have no interest in doing anything but training a DJ and getting him out there and getting him to learn what he's doing. I have no ulterior motive on that. And if they had any idea how little interest I had in a person beyond what they were learning occupationally, they would never have that problem. But that's the thing. But also, as we get older, we're noticing that there's just like not a lot of that work ethic anymore, where somebody even wants to come out and just carry stuff and be a roadie. And I mean, that's kind of how you start. You can sit in your house and you can learn how to be a DJ that way, but there's a whole lot of stuff you learn when you're out on the road that you don't really learn in your basement, or you don't really learn in your kitchen if you're Grandmaster Flash, because that's where his setup was. But that kind of thing, that's part of it, right? Then there's all this other stuff, like you need to know your music, and you need to know your catalog of music. You can like what you like, but you need to like pick up like a reference guide that's like 570 pages long, and you need to flip through it and learn about everything. You need to learn about music that you like, music that influence the music that you like. Then you need to learn different forms of music in different regions and different eras and different types of beats and times and arrangements. That's also stuff that helps you in your job. And you can look at somebody like, I believe it was, I want to say it was Dr. Dre that did this, would take music that was just, you know, I do have a friend that does this and I love it every time I see it, because it's just like very hard to find. Somebody that takes like an arrangement or a song or something that just doesn't have anything to do with what's going on and throws it in, mixes two completely different genres together and makes it work. That's amazing to me. That's somebody that knows their catalog, right? So sure, you can know your hip hop and you can know your rap and you can know your, you know, your dance and things that usually you hear in clubs. But when somebody mixes an old rockabilly tune in there, or mixes, you know, an old slow song in there, or just something that like something from the 20s, something from the 40s, or something that like you wouldn't expect to hear, that's like a big deal, right? So it's important to be able to have the variety and the versatility and to understand how music is set up, how it's put together, where it came from, the samples that you hear, what song are they from, and, you know, soundtracks and different artists are from bands from the 70s and 60s and, just history of music and all the stuff that comes with it. And not just like, well, I like these 12 songs and I'm going to play these 12 songs. And if nobody else likes them, I guess that's too bad. You really need to be able to get out there and just like jump in and play stuff from any time and be able to just put it together. And what I call build an atmosphere, weave together the sounds in order to create a feeling in a room that wasn't there before you got there. That's basically what it is. Knowing your acoustics and knowing where the best place to set speakers up and knowing how to set your EQ and knowing, how much bass you need to put into something. Walking around a room and walking all the way down to the end of the room and turning around and saying, okay, this is what it sounds like over here. Knowing how it bounces off the walls and knowing how much echo is in the room and all that kind of stuff is kind of important. And I don't know sometimes that people pay that much attention to that stuff. So it's like anything else. There's upsides and downsides to it, but not getting too detailed because there'll probably be a book. There's maybe a book someday of my life. Whether somebody around not wants to read it, I have no idea, but hopefully have something to pass on that's of use to some degree. That's pretty much the story of me as a DJ and, how I started with music, how I got into it, where I'm at today and where I think I might be going tomorrow. And who knows, standing at the precipice of 40 and going, okay, wow, I can't believe it's been this long. But that's that. I am working on getting some guests on the podcast because I am sure people are sick and tired of listening to me. I can't say that I would blame you. I tend to be, I would be a little bit sick of it myself, but trying to bring you stuff to listen to that's somewhat entertaining, somewhat informative if I can. But yes, I am working to get some guests on the show. There are 3 people I have in mind right now and trying to get that stuff coordinated. But in the meantime, I want you to have a nice July. And if you are, actually in any part of the country right now, I want you to stay cool because it is ridiculous right now. It is brutal all over the country as far as heat's concerned. It's no joke out there. So if you can try to stay cool and in the shade and in the AC or whatever you can do, in the water at the beach, whatever it is that you need to do to stay cool, do it. www.lanaanddave.com. Download, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. And I will talk to you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Hey, you just listened to Love and Life with Lana and Dave. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share the podcast, leave us a comment or review, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. We'll see you soon.